Welcome to Medical Intuition Illuminated, the podcast bringing light to the wisdom of the body. I'm your host, Laura Wise, a medical intuitive and psychic medium dedicated to helping you understand the subtle and layered ways your body communicates. Here, we explore the meeting point of intuition, physiology, and energy, approaching the body not as a puzzle to fix, but as a wise, expressive system that's always speaking. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not medical advice, and it does not replace professional healthcare, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider for any medical concerns. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the first installment of this story and you are ready for more, and it's about to get a little bit weirder. So there is something that I want to say first before we get into the story, in that there is a good portion of my spiritual journey, spiritual awakening, what have you, that was initiated through the use of psychedelic substances. Now, my goal in using those substances wasn't necessarily specifically spiritual awakening, although I was often, interested in using them as a tool to expand my own personal perception and understanding of the world. I think, even when I was in environments that were a little more recreational, I would usually still kind of go in with the intention of trying to learn something, either trying to learn something about myself, learn something about the nature of reality, or, just human experience, and those kinds of things. And there was a period of time when I really kind of downplayed the impact of these psychedelics on my, spiritual awakening and the increase of my abilities. And I think, a good portion of that was, just feeling like being afraid that it would invalidate those experiences in some way, or make those, not as potent as maybe some other folks' spiritual awakenings that happened maybe, more quote unquote spontaneously. But I've come to the place now where I just really see it as I had a lot of personal mental blocks around, experiencing the world in a certain way, because those are things that protected me for a long time. And then I was a sensitive person. And so I had created these structures around my mind to prevent me from experiencing some of these abilities that I had. And when I took psychedelics in these situations, a lot of times those protections were just blown away, just completely dissolved. And I really had no choice but to kind of feel these things. And they were then, once I understood them and I had awareness around them, that they were, just present in my life from there going forward. I have always had a great deal of respect for these substances. I've always been as careful as I could be. Not every, we're all young and dumb sometimes, right? But generally, I tried to be pretty conscious of what I was taking, the classic things they say of setting, and source, right? So, being conscious of what was the mindset I was going into this with? What were the things that were going on in my life that I knew would be stirred up, that I would be engaging with? What was the setting that I was in? I really had the opportunity to be in a lot of really supportive environments that made these positive experiences overall, not every time, because we got to face our shadow, right? And we can't control everything. And then source. And I definitely attempted as much as possible to understand what it was that I was taking, where it was coming from, and trusting where that had been the person that had brought that to me. So those were very important aspects of that. And I think it's been very cool to watch how over time and over my lifetime, since a lot of these things occurred, the collective consciousness around psychedelics has shifted dramatically. There has been some incredible pioneering, some incredible research that's being done around the effects of these, and more people are able to use them as a really positive tool in their life to, break through different challenges they're having, tackle, shadow sides of themselves, and use them as a jumping off point. And this is, not all substances are for everyone. And I definitely encourage care and conscientiousness when approaching these topics, but they've been overall a very positive influence for me. And at this stage in my life, I can't really engage with them too much anymore because I'm just too sensitive. Now that I, spend a lot of time in these areas, I just, they're not necessarily quote unquote fun anymore for me because it's just, I'm just too sensitive, and I just pick up on all the little kind of subtle in between energies that, are, always present, but I have more kind of protections around. And I've really built up a good, really good energetic boundaries. And then again, when these substances, are ingested, they kind of just do away with my boundaries. And that's a little bit overwhelming. And I'm not really in a place in my life anymore where that's kind of something that I'm seeking out. But again, I'm very grateful for the experiences that I had. So throughout my early 20s, I had the privilege of being able to kind of grow up in the Bay Area that is, a very diverse place in a lot of ways. There's a lot of diversity of thought and experience. And all throughout the period of my 20s, I was very involved with a few groups of individuals and organizations that were particularly focused on, enhancing what would be considered rave culture, from a more conscientious point of view. And so a lot of these organizations had started out of, folks that had experienced kind of early raves in the 90s, and this experience of being on the dance floor and feeling connected and having these like peak spiritual experiences through this combination of the environment and the music and the people and everything. And so these folks wanted to cultivate a kind of safer and more contained experience that was a little bit more focused on kind of the spiritual aspects rather than the party aspects. Don't get me wrong, there was definitely a good time to be had. But really it was about kind of personal growth and development. And so these were incredible spaces for me to kind of come of age in. I started going at the age of 20 and continued to go, and they would be just so nourishing every time. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about, different kinds of people. They were really accepting spaces. These were very queer positive spaces. So there were a lot of people just really learning how to be themselves, how to express themselves in different ways, wear the clothes they wanted to wear, interact with people, just being freely themselves. And I really credit a lot of the folks that, were in these communities as helping to kind of help raise me into adulthood in that own way, in allowing me to explore different perspectives and, and also just really enjoy the dance and how to move my body and how to really feel energy in those spaces. And so these were extremely impactful for me. I went on a regular basis all the way into, my early 30s when I kind of just moved a little bit farther away from some of these communities and was just kind of more involved in my career at that time. But these were super, super important to me throughout that period of time. And the people that were in the spaces were really incredible too, in that a lot of them were really pioneers within a lot of the, psychedelic medicine spaces and really helping to drive the research that we have forward, so that we are able to be in this period of time now. And so I was able to have some really incredible deep conversations with folks that were kind of at the forefront of this movement, and understanding kind of the psychology and spirituality associated with them. And along with that, it was also, in the Bay Area, and there were a lot of incredible tech innovators and people who were, really working on cutting edge technology and innovation within that area. So it was an incredible opportunity to, not only just, play and have fun in these areas, but also just really get to interact with some incredibly intelligent and wise folks of all ages. So that was really incredible as well. So when we ended the last episode, I had just kind of finished my degree in psychology, and I was, going to open up my mind in new ways. So around this time also, I had also started going to the arts festival experience called Burning Man. And this was a phase in my life. Once I started going to Burning Man, I went 5 years in a row. And there was a time when I thought that I would never not go to Burning Man, because the level of freedom of experience and just creative output is unmatched with, almost anything else in the world. And this was, I went between the years of 2007 and 2011. And so the festival has, as I've heard, has changed quite a bit since that time. It's not necessarily the same experience, but I feel like those same kind of peak moments and experiences can still exist, even if it's been a little more magnified, and there's more people and it's more expensive and there's more influencers and whatnot. There's still so much genuine human connection that is experienced. And there are many, many aspects of that period of my life that were so enriching to the work that I do now. I just got to experience a lot of different kinds of people and different kinds of situations, and, open-mindedness in a way that I think really accelerated my personal growth. It was also really challenging. There were a lot of times when I'm like, why am I doing this? This is hard, right? You're taking everything you need out into a completely inhospitable environment, and you're setting up camp, and you have to bring all your food, you have to bring all your water. The only thing they sell are coffee and ice, and so you're really having to boil things down to what is really necessary. And to think that every single piece of art, every costume, every food item, every shared gift out there has been brought meaningfully, hundreds of miles out there, is its own thing as well. And so there's a lot of discomfort. You're hot, it's dusty. A lot of times there's these dust storms that just blow constantly, complete whiteout. It's, cold at nighttime. And you kind of have to be concerned about exposure. When you're buying your ticket, you have to sign your life away, basically. There was one year where, my dad offered to buy my ticket for my birthday, and he went to go buy it on the website, and he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't finish it because he's like, they literally say death in the ticket, like you could die. He's like, I'm not signing that. And so he just gave me the money to buy it that year. But, it's not a small endeavor, to take on. But, once I started going and became a part of the culture, it becomes something like, you're walking around all year and you're like, oh, this would be great for the playa. Oh, this would create an amazing experience for somebody else. Oh, this would be like such a cool art piece. And, that's its own magic. each year is its own evolution, because the first year you have no idea what to expect. You're just like thrown into this environment. It's overwhelming. People are nice, but you're just like, whoa, that was a lot, right? And then the second year you go, you're like, okay, I got the hang of it. But also you start, there's not as much shiny. So you start to notice kind of some of the dirtier parts or some of the less savory parts of humanity that come out in that experience. And by the third year, I was like, yes, I've got this. And I was in a really good place in my life in that I just finished college. I finished my psychology degree, and I was going to take some time off after college, and I just moved back to Sebastopol, California, which is one of my absolute favorite places. I had just broken up with a partner of several years, and that was really freeing, and that relationship just was not a good fit for me. And so kind of the world was very wide open for me in many ways. I was kind of just like, universe, like, bring it, and I was doing a number of just kind of like odd jobs and creative work around that time that just provided me a great deal of freedom. Freedom I will probably never have again in my life. And I am immensely grateful for the opportunity to just play and experience life. It had its drawbacks in some ways, but I think the benefits were much greater. So my third year going to Burning Man, I, was very sure that I wanted to have a pretty magnificent experience. I had gotten the costuming down. I had, I understood the culture. I was with a group of friends I felt really comfortable expressing myself within. We had made a little camp together that we were very excited about, and we were just ready to go have an amazing time. So once we're out there on the playa, and I can't remember what night of the week it is, because everything's kind of building towards the end of the week, where the man burns and then the temple burns. So it was sometime in the middle of the week, and I was like, this is my big night. I just know it's my big night. And we set out for the night. We had gotten in our costumes, and I was really into costuming at the time, and we had all decided we were going to be different bears on this particular night. And I was a polar bear. So I had created this kind of like fur belly dance skirt and a little like crop top with a hood with ears on it. And I was this furry bear kind of bouncing around the playa. And so we go out, and I was like, I specifically want to have, an enhanced experience. And I was like, I'm going to find some LSD. And I had it before, but not really very regularly, maybe like a couple times before. And they had been very important, big experiences, but it's a commitment, right? It's a 12-hour or more, and it can be incredibly intense. So we begin our evening for, the night, and we're kind of setting out and getting started. And, I'm starting to feel the effects of the LSD coming on, and things are getting a little bit weird. And I was also with another group of friends with me. And, my really close friend at the time, she had taken MDMA, which is a much more body-centered substance. It's really it's a really lovey substance. You feel kind of overwhelming senses of love and connection, and you're very present. Whereas LSD is very, it's in a way disassociative, but it's more like the whole idea of who you are and your identity just completely dissolves, and you are the universe. You are experiencing the universe, in its entirety. You're noticing the way that the molecules move, and it's really just kind of breaks the bounds of your conscious mind. And you can become aware of things at such a, more minute level. And so, we're both kind of starting to feel our substances, and, she turns to me. I just remember over and she says she's just feeling the love. She's like, I love you. I love you. And she's expressing all these things. And I just turn to her and I back and I say, who is this you speak of? I was just kind of not even, attached to my identity at all at this point. So at some point I get separated from my friends. We were at what's called a sound camp, and there's like a lot, some loud DJ music playing, and there's a lot of people dancing. And it just became a little bit too much for me in that moment. And the immediate impulse that I have was like, I got to go to the temple. And the temple at Burning Man is one of my favorite spaces there. And it's one of the main reasons I think that I continue to go over and over again, year after year. And so there's the man, there's like this effigy of a man that's every year is on this pedestal. It's at the center of the city, and they burn it on Saturday night. And then there's the temple, and that sits behind that. And it's done by a different builder every single year. There's a different team that designs it and creates it. There's always a theme around it. But there are some things that remain the same. And the main thing is that it is a place for people to come and kind of leave behind or process things that they need to in their life. People will come and they'll bring ashes of loved ones. They'll bring memories. They'll bring photos. People will write all over the walls of the temple, things that they want to release, things, memories of people, stories, sometimes secrets, things that they want to let go of, things that they are being carrying around that are heavy for them. And it's really kind of the spiritual heart of this festival. And when the man burns on Saturday night, it's a big party. Everybody's like, yeah, rah, and there's like cheering, and it's a big thing. And there's this big energy release when it's burned. But the temple is burned on Sunday night, the official kind of end of the week-long festival. And while the temple burns, it is completely silent. Nobody really moves. There's no cheering. Lots of people are crying. They're releasing. But it's a completely different energy from when the man burns. And there was this man called David Best, and he was the initiator of the temple to begin with. He's the one that created the first temple, and then he did subsequently many, many temples after that. And so this was kind of really special to him. And, he's responsible for kind of creating this space within this kind of chaotic festival for people to come and, in a place of reverence. And every night, every time they would have the temple burn night, he would walk around kind of the circle, the inside circle of it. And he would go from person to person and he would say, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not, to every single person. And, most people would be like, I don't know, what are you talking about? Like, it's not my fault. But every, 10th, 20th, 100th person would just break out crying, and hugging him and say, like, you don't even know how much I needed to hear that. My, son committed suicide, or, this other thing happened, or, whatnot. And they just needed to be seen in that way. And so, that's the energy behind the temple, is just this place of, holding space for the human experience and, our quest for spirituality in whatever way that makes shape for. And so I just loved it. And so I immediately was like drawn to this place when I was having this experience. It's a decent walk. It probably is a good, half mile, quarter mile to a half mile from where I was. And I'm walking and, and it's nighttime, the moon is out, and I'm just walking towards the temple. And I remember the whole time that I was out there wandering to and from the temple, I did this a couple times throughout the night, I was just talking to the moon. I was talking to the moon the whole time, and the moon was asking me, of all the things that you're doing in the world, why is this the thing that you're doing? And I was attempting to answer this question. I really didn't have a complete answer at that time. And, now in retrospect, I'm like, those were my guides. Those were my guides talking to me. We were having this conversation. And it was a beautiful experience. So there are many parts to that that whole day that I had this experience, there are many micro stories within it that were just really powerful. And a lot of them were about just kind of noticing things, noticing the way that energy moved in different ways. And at the end of this experience, or it was kind of towards the end, I go back to camp and I see my friend who, is somebody that I've known for several years. And he takes one look at me and he says, "You're older." And I just say, "Yes." And I did. I felt different. I was, definitely not the same person who had set out the night before. I did continue to do a few more things, as the, substance was still active. It was like daytime now. I remember going and sitting on this blanket with a few other folks, and there was this man across from me. And the entire time, he did not say a single word. But I looked into that man's eyes and I heard him speaking in poems inside of my head. Clear as day. And he looked at me and he said, "Wandering, wandering, can't stop, seeing so many things, but can't talk." And I had never experienced anything like this before, just really feeling everything this man was feeling and experiencing him inside of my mind. So anyways, we have, the rest of the festival, we finish it out, we come back home, and after Burning Man, it's a pretty intense experience. So it takes a good, several weeks, honestly, to really kind of get back to quote unquote normal life. They call it the default world, a lot of burners. It takes a while to really integrate all of the experiences that you had and unpack them and understand them and, really kind of get back to a regular rhythm. And so it was really in October when a lot of the things started happening for me. And October has historically been a very odd month for me, especially since this period of time. It's been a very big and impactful time for me. My daughter was born in October, which is a whole other story that I will share. And I met my husband in October, and all of this kind of stuff started to happen in October. So I had been back for a little bit, and I was, at home one night, and I just started hearing what we might call, I guess, voices in my head. But these were not, they weren't audible voices, but I could just hear, people talking to me and people sharing wisdom. And it was always very positive. It was always, really helpful. And they felt like wise beings. This did not feel nefarious in any way. There was no, bad vibes. The hardest thing about it was that it was just loud. They were all talking at once. Everybody had an opinion. And I started to refer to them as the council, and this was before I had really done any spiritual development or anything. And at some point I was like, okay, guys, look, this is a lot. And if you want to talk to me, you really got to either pick a representative or take turns or something, because this is just too much. And I just organized them in my head, and they listened to me, and they would, share helpful information. I also started to just really pick up, energy and vibes around this time too. So if, somebody really just kind of was off, would set off my spidey senses, and I would be able to pick up on that. Around this time too, I started to just kind of have a lot more spiritual curiosity. And so my roommate at the time, she told me that she was going to be going to a journey drumming class, and she had done this before. And she really enjoyed it. And she was like, "Why don't you come with me? And it'll be great." So we go to the class. It's out of these people's houses. We go to some house in the suburbs, and it was kind of in a room upstairs in their house. And it was these two white people with, now, looking back, this was kind of very inappropriate situation, in that this was not their, traditional medicine that they were teaching about. They had learned this somewhere else. But I didn't know that at the time, and it really ended up being a positive experience. So in journey drumming, it's done through kind of this repetitive drumming sound at a particular speed that's constantly, that kind of puts you into a trance state. So we lay down, we put our blankets on, we go into this kind of journey drumming thing. And what you do is they describe it as 3 different worlds, right? There's the underworld, or the lower world, where kind of like there's a lot of animal spirits and things like that. And then there's the middle world where we live. And then there's the higher upper world where kind of these other higher beings live. And so we were going to go to the underworld. So you basically imagine going like through a cave down into the earth and into the ground. And so I do this whole, exercise. I go into the ground. I drop down. I end up dropping down into what basically looks like the hill that used to be behind my house when I lived in Simi Valley, that I used to walk around with the cats in. And I'm sitting on this hill, and this giant, beautiful golden eagle shows up. It's with rainbow streaks all through the feathers. And kind of rainbow behind it, rainbow imagery kind of behind this eagle, and it just shows up. And immediately I'm like, what? This is so stereotypical. I can't believe, like I went to this journey drumming thing and an eagle showed up. Like, what is this? This can't possibly be right. So I just wake myself up out of the meditation, and I'm like, I'm going to try this again. So I go do the same thing. I go into the cave and I go back down and I land on the hill again. And there's the eagle, and he's sitting there, and, birds are very prideful. He was a little bit offended that I did not immediately accept that this was, what was supposed to be. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is for real. And so he invites me, onto his back, and we fly through the land, and he kind of shares some knowledge with me. And this was just a beautiful experience. And so, we come back out of the meditation and go home and kind of share our experiences with each other. And this was a really beautiful, beautiful experience. But, more and more weird things keep happening. At this time, I was also journaling quite a bit. I started doing a dream journal, and then I would also, in the same journal, write about kind of just regular journaling about what was happening. And then oftentimes I would then refer back to my dreams, from the regular writing, and use it as this kind of general log of my experiences. And so I'd be like, hey, look, you asked for this thing, and here it is showing up in your dream, or, make little notes. And I drew pictures, and I wrote poems, and did a lot of those things. So I remember around this time that all of these things were happening, and all of this stuff was waking up in me, that there was a time that I went to the dog park with my dog that I had at the time. His name was Story, and I was just taking him to the local dog park, and I was just kind of hanging out on the side of the fence while he went and did his dog stuff. And I'm just sitting there, and this dog walks right up to me, and he kind of stands near me, and I hear him in my head, and he is saying, "Oh, so you're a walker between worlds." And then he trots off, and I just am standing there kind of dumbfounded. It's like a normal day, and there's all these people around, and just being like, did that really happen? And, this is really before I had really developed my mediumship. So, I'm having these experiences, but I don't really know what to call them at the time. But this dog sure did. And I still think about that. Right. And now that's something that, I am a walker between worlds, and that's what I do on a regular basis. Is kind of move between these different spaces. So it was pretty incredible to have this called out to me by an animal. Around this time also, I had started to get a lot more into music and creating and playing music. And so my brother is an incredible DJ and electronic music producer and whatnot. He's written he wrote the theme song to this podcast. It's actually recycled from one of his songs that he adapted for this modality. His name's Derek Ryan. Check out his work. He's incredible. But at this time, he had always been kind of hinting, hey, do you want to learn to DJ? I'll teach you how to DJ. We need more like female DJs. And at some point I discovered the genre of music called drum and bass. And it's a very fast tempo beat, but it's kind of almost like so fast that it gets into this like groove where it feels smooth and slower in its own way. And I just fell in love with this genre. And I was like, yes, teach me to DJ, teach me to spin drum and bass. And so I would go down to San Francisco. I was living in Sebastopol. I would go down to San Francisco. He had a little studio that he rented in the Tenderloin in there that we would like go and practice. And he taught me how to spin. And eventually that led into, us making music together and producing music together. And so, I did a lot of vocals on tracks. We kind of wrote some tracks together and we made some drum and bass music. And we actually have still collaborate today on occasion. I have kids, so I don't have a lot of time to do that, but he is incredibly prolific. And so every once in a while he'd be like, hey, I need some vocals. Can you, throw me some vocals, and I'll do that for him. And, other things as well. So I was really getting into music and I was starting to play. And as I was continuing to go to these events that were kind of like the raves. Sometimes these would be thrown in like churches, which was very cool. I got to spin several of them, which was very fun to be able to experience that. And something that was really cool about that was also just being able to experience the effect of what it is that I chose to play on the crowd immediately in front of me. And so learning how to kind of build a crowd up and release them and then bring them back in and let them out. That was an incredible experience for understanding, again, how energy worked and how that moved. And around this time too, I was also, again, I didn't, really have a lot of responsibilities. I was doing a lot of like odd jobs. And so I had a lot of freedom. And so I would go out dancing quite a bit. Sometimes it would be ecstatic dance. And sometimes it would just be, going out to the local music venue. Sebastopol had, some venues that were able to pull some incredible, like global tier talent through it. And so we would just get kind of incredible music right as it was coming up and becoming popular more broadly. And so I got to, really got to go out to some incredible sets. And through this, I was doing a lot of dance and I was dancing several days a week. And so I was also playing with energy on the dance floor and understanding, how to invite energy in if I wanted to dance with other people, or how to push energy away if I, didn't want to, and how to create boundaries energetically around myself and my space, and watch the impacts of that. And, dance became really, spiritual for me in the way that I felt like I was able to connect so deeply to just spirit and energy and all of these things as I was on the dance floor. So while I did have some friends that were kind of vague, interested in spirituality a little bit here and there, I really didn't have a lot of support for what was happening to me at the time. These abilities were getting turned up. I was having these experiences, and I would kind of try to share them with my friends, and I would share them with this friend that had taken me to the journey drumming. And, she's into it up until a certain point. And then it was kind of like, yeah, you're just too weird. Like this, I don't know if I believe you. I don't think that happened, and I really didn't have a lot of insight into kind of what was happening to me. I didn't have a lot of ways to develop. I didn't have a lot of tools. And so I really kind of, oscillated between just being like, this is cool, and being like really freaked out by it. And around this time also, I started to kind of try to tell my family what was happening and try to bring it up with my mom. And she really could not deal. She really freaked out. She was like, oh, are we going to have to commit you? Is this, mental illness? And so I really just was like, nope, going to shut up about this. I'm not going to talk to people about what's going on with me anymore. Around this time also, I was starting to really want to be working with horses again. And I was still really passionate about this kind of equine experiential learning and what I had learned around that. And so I started working with a couple of rescue horses in that context. And I had, worked with a few clients. And most of the clients that I ended up working with at that time ended up being young men, or men between the ages of like 20 and, 35. And it was really an incredible tool for them because it allowed them to kind of bypass some of their own hesitations around things, because they were working with this big, powerful animal and it felt very cool and engaging. And then we would kind of be able to get around some of those blocks that they have. And so what's cool about working in this context is, let's say we're sitting down in the pasture, we're having a conversation about what's going on in their lives. They're just talking normally, but all the time I'm tuned into the horse. I'm paying attention to what's going on with that horse. And then suddenly in the conversation, that horse jumps or moves or steps back or reacts in some way. The person hasn't changed their tone of voice. Nothing has happened, but that is giving me a signal that the animal is picking up on a subtle energetic and vibrational change within the person that they're reacting to. And so at that point I say, hey, why don't we rewind? What were you just talking about right then? Let's unpack that. And so we would be able to get, very deep, very quickly with these topics. And that was really cool. So I did that for a little bit, but over time, I was starting to get into a place where my life just wasn't working for me anymore. I was getting to be about the age of 26 and, my Saturn return was looming. And it hit me really hard. I basically lost the great majority of the friendships that I had and the community that I had built at that time. I met a person that I started dating who ended up being just not a very healthy relationship for me, that I ended up staying in for far too long. And one of the reasons that I think we really stayed together so long was he was really one of the first people to believe me about these things. I started to describe some of the spirit experiences that I was having and what I was hearing and feeling and sensing, and he just looked at me and he was like, "Oh, so you're a medium." Like, no big deal. And it was the first time it had ever been named for me. And first time anybody ever called me a medium. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. Like, you're recognizing this in me. And it felt really good at the time to be validated and seen in my experiences because there wasn't anybody else in my life who was guiding me in that way. And so I did learn quite a bit from this person about, how to understand what was happening to me and some frameworks around it. But this person ended up really kind of isolating me from a lot of the other relationships that I had in my life and people in my life. And just overall, it was not a healthy situation for me to be in. And so I went through this great period of loss, around just everything. And this was a very off again, on again relationship, this person. And it was usually, him that initiated the off again for me. And I was just at the time, like, so desperate to be loved and seen and accepted that I would have taken, scraps of affection, for that. So when I met this person, we met online through, I believe it was OkCupid at the time, which is, dating me a little bit. But we had been kind of going back and forth and chatting online, and, we had decided that we were going to meet. And at that time, I was on a road trip. I was driving back from Alabama with my dad in a car. His mom had just passed away. And so we had been cleaning out her house and preparing it to sell, and then kind of driving her car with some other items in it back home to California. And so we had been kind of crossing the country for a while. And so, literally as soon as, we decide to make a plan to meet up, me and this person, that night, I go to bed, and we happened to be staying in Grand Junction, Colorado, which since this experience, I have heard some stories about kind of the energy of that particular, area, and, that it can be very intense and can stir a lot of things up. But anyways, we get this, random hotel in Grand Junction as we're passing through, and we go to sleep. And that night I have what turns out to be later a very prophetic dream. And in this dream, it feels extremely vivid, and I am in this garden-like area, and there's several kind of people milling about in the background, and I'm shown this most beautiful black man, extremely tall, and he's looking at me, and he's smiling, but he's crying. So he's crying through his tears and kind of just, really feeling these big emotions. And, later on, I come to recognize that this was Archangel Michael, and this is the first time I really encountered him as any kind of energy. And what I later understood was, the energy was kind of like, you are going to have to go through some really challenging times. And it's going to be really hard for you. And unfortunately, like, this is, I'm sorry that this is going to be so painful, but it's also necessary, in your journey. And following that, and then that kind of fades, and it moves into showing me some other, kind of symbolic representations of what that, relationship dynamic ended up being later on. And those all kind of came true later on. So, this, as much as I, want to be like, there's a part of me that was like, I wish I'd never met this person, I also recognized that this was somebody, that was a necessary part of this kind of interaction that I had, was a necessary part of my own personal growth and solidifying actually my own fortitude in many ways. And so this, went over for a few years of period of time where we kind of went back and forth in this relationship, and it was really toxic. So after I kind of, lost all these friendships, I was like, I got to figure out, what I'm going to do for a job. I got to figure out some other things that I'm doing. And I ended up getting a job at a local Ayurvedic center. And, this was a place where they had an Ayurvedic education program. They had kind of an apothecary where they would make remedies. The kind of master teacher would do sessions with people, and she would do her own practice, and then she also taught. And then she had several practitioners underneath her as well. And then they also had a clinic that they would run weekly where the public would get to come and have Ayurvedic sessions with the students of these different educational programs. And it was very cool. I suddenly got thrown very deeply into Ayurvedic medicine, which was incredible. I worked in the office. I helped run the clinic. I was able to take classes with her and really get, a pretty robust education in Ayurvedic medicine. And this particular teacher, her specialty was teaching pulse, or one of her specialties. And there are very few Ayurvedic teachers that actually will teach pulse. And she had trained with Vasant Lad, who is, one of the founding people who brought Ayurveda to the West and really expanded it within America, and was able, taught many, many, many different students. And she was able to learn pulse from him directly. And in pulse reading, it's very cool in Ayurveda. There's, different levels of pulse, and each different level is looking at different tissues, different organ systems, different areas. And we would do pulse practice on each other. And for me, the level of pulse that came the most easily and naturally was the chakra level. And I would get on somebody's chakra level and I would just get all this information about them. I'd be sitting there and I'd be like, oh, you have a really great relationship with your mother. You guys are like best friends, and I would just talk about what was going on in their life. And they'd be like, I'd basically be giving a psychic reading, but we'd be, in this pulse session instead. So I am immensely grateful for that experience. I just got so much knowledge that I use now, and it really gave me such a different framework for the body and understanding at a deeper level. Prior to this, when I had studied holistic health in college, I had really been more drawn to traditional Chinese medicine, and that initially made more sense to me. But then learning Ayurveda, I was like, oh, okay, this is what this is about. I got a lot of herbal knowledge. I got a lot of essential oil knowledge. I understood a little bit more about kind of some of the body work techniques that they would use. And I just got really, really a wealth of information from this experience. So after working at the Ayurveda Center for a while, I, kind of went so deep into more of the, natural medicine things and the woo things, and had some challenging experiences within kind of trying to build community within local households that I was, with roommates and stuff, and ended up getting kind of burned by some of those experiences where I had set up, a house, a group of people, and was trying to be a responsible house mom and tell them rules. And they didn't like, they're very reasonable rules. Like, don't, use other people's knives to cut open your coconut and like chip the blade or break something, like, replace it, or, look, we all have to clean the kitchen, just like basic consideration rules. But I was really demonized in this situation, in that I was seen as controlling or manipulative. And I was basically on my birthday voted off the island and voted out of these houses. So at this point, I was just a little over, just this whole kind of alternative hippie community thing. And I just wanted to get a little bit more into, quote unquote, normal experiences. So I ended up getting a job at a shipping company, or it was a skincare company. And I worked as basically the entire shipping department. And so, I would be like checking the orders every morning. I'd be packing up the boxes. I'd be, it was in conjunction with a dermatologist in the area. And so I was able to just kind of like do this job. I was alone in a warehouse area, by myself, pretty much. It was a pretty small warehouse, but I was there kind of by myself all day. I could listen to whatever podcasts or music I wanted, as long as I got my work done. Occasionally people would stop by, but generally it was just me. And in some ways this was amazing, but it also, because it was so quiet, my mind got loud again, and I started to hear and feel things again. And, these abilities, I tried to really have a quote unquote normal life, but I was really kind of trying to, I just couldn't turn it off, especially with all the quiet that was happening. So I ended up having a couple of my first, true mediumship experiences with, past people that have passed on, and during this period of time. And I'm trying to remember the exact order of it. But I think, so I had one coworker, and we, had gotten close-ish, where we kind of would hang out and we'd go out drinking or whatever and hanging out. And her sister passed away very suddenly. And it was just, devastating for her, because, nobody saw it coming. And, this person was still fairly young and had a kid, and it was just, very heartbreaking. And my coworker friend was just, of course, devastated and really having a hard time with her grief. And so I was sitting in the warehouse with her, and we were talking about her sister, and they were still kind of trying to figure out kind of what had happened. And I felt this presence show up. And I immediately was like, yeah, this is the sister. And I felt her sister come, and she actually came and she went into my body. And I have better boundaries now, so this has never happened since. But she came into my body, and she was just like, she was showing me what had happened, how she had passed. And she was trying to get me to hug. She's just like, I just want to hug my sister. Like, help me hug my sister. And I was really freaked out. I didn't want to tell this grieving friend of mine what was going on because it felt very inappropriate. And I couldn't do it, and I didn't hug her. And eventually she left my body, but it was very uncomfortable when she was in my body. And then later on, they got more information back about the passing, and the stuff that the sister had shown me was kind of validated. But I still didn't want to say anything. I was not comfortable with these abilities. I was not comfortable with his experience, and I just didn't end up saying anything to my coworker. Around the same time, I had another coworker that I also worked with who had a friend that lived up on a property that was connected to her wife that ended up taking his own life. And as we were kind of I was talking about this with my friend in this warehouse, about what had just happened, to her friend and what they were dealing with. I suddenly feel him show up. And my friend notices that my face changes, and she's like, he's here, isn't he? And I was like, yeah. And I ended up having a conversation. He basically told me to explain like his perspective of why he did it and how he felt about it. And I kept trying to, when I was communicating it, I kept trying to soften the language that he was giving it to me. And he would be like, that's not what I effing said. And like, he was really like, you not telling her what I directly said. And he really wanted me to use a lot more like cussing and all that kind of stuff, because that's just who he was. And, my friend was fine with that. But I remember, after work that day, I was just like, I was off. I didn't know how to deal with these energies. I didn't know how to deal with, having somebody come through like that. And I had just started dating my now husband at the time. I think we had only been dating for like a month or less even. And I was going over to like see him that evening, and he looks at me and he's immediately like, what's wrong? Like, what is up with you? You just seem off. And I was like, look, I gotta tell you some stuff about me. Like, I had not really shared any of my kind of spiritual inclinations or like abilities at this point. And I was like, I have this thing, and, I think I'm a medium, and I sometimes experience, I've had a couple of these experiences now, and, you should know that about me. And, I bless him. He was immediately like cool with it. He was like healthily skeptical, and he still is. And I love that about him. But he was just like, oh yeah, I went and saw like a medium on stage once. And it was like, there were a lot of things that happened in that experience that I could not explain. And so I'm like, I'm open to it. And like, if that's who you are, that's great. I'm really enjoying you. And like, we have a great time together and a great connection. So that's fine. I don't think he knew 100% what he was signing up for now. And he's been a great sport like the whole time. And he's so supportive of me and my path. And I deeply appreciate that. But it was really comforting to be able to kind of share this part of myself with him. And so, things kind of, calmed down generally. I didn't have a lot more experiences at that time. I was dating my now husband, and, we were both kind of like in these kind of dead end jobs that weren't really going anywhere. And he was like, I need to pivot my career, and I want to go into this specific industry, renewable energy. And I'm going to look at jobs, in the city. And he had gotten this job in the city. And then he was like, yeah, do you want to come with me? And I was like, okay, I'll move down there. And my brother heard that I was going to move down to the city, and he was living in San Francisco at the time, and he had just started working as an engineer, software engineer. He had gone through kind of one of these hacker boot camps. And he was, had just gotten an incredible job, and he was really excited about it. And he, came up specifically, and we went on a walk, and he was like, I don't want you to move to the city without a plan. I want you to really think about where you want to go next in your career. And he's like, I have some ideas for you. And he presented these 3 different career paths. We went on the walk, and he was like, you could be a UX designer, which I've never heard of this before. I had never heard of it. A product manager, or you could be, a software engineer or a data scientist. And he's like, I just want to why don't you look into these and consider them? And so I did. And I looked into UX design and UX research, and immediately I was like, yes, this makes so much sense to me. I totally get this. I feel like this is aligned. And I found a school that had kind of a boot camp program called General Assembly. They have this UX design. So UX stands for user experience design intensive program that was like 10 weeks down in the city. And I applied to it, and I got in, and I moved to the city, and I was going to completely change my career. So I'll be continuing this story again next week, where I'll be diving into how I actually started to develop my abilities and really discover the whole field of medical intuition and how I started doing that. So go ahead and check it out next week. Talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to Medical Intuition Illuminated. If this episode resonated, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who might benefit. Special thanks to Derek Ryan for music. Until next time, listen deeply to the wisdom of your body.